Halo 4 is definitely a game which divided opinions. There are many, I think it's fair to say, who weren't huge fans of the direction developer 343 Industries took the franchise in, while others loved it, and to this day consider 343's maiden entry to the series to be a worthy successor to the Bungie titles of old. I personally lean further towards the former than the latter, it must be said, but there is still some good stuff tucked away in the game, and by talking through Halo 4's missions from worst to best, I hope to highlight where I think the game shines and where it's simply fine, or indeed on some occasions a lot worse than that. So let's get cracking. It will likely come as absolutely no surprise to those of you who saw my video looking at this mission in more detail to learn that I think Shutdown is very much the bottom of Halo 4's barrel. On paper, it certainly sounds like it could be something very special, with a series of Pelican sections broken up by on-foot combat, but in reality, it falls very short of what I think we could have got. My biggest bugbear is with your time spent piloting the Pelican. For a brief moment, it seems as if 343 wants to take their lead from Bungie and attempt to put their own twist on Halo Reach's New Alexandria. In actuality, they managed to do anything but, with there being little more for you to do than fly in a straight line and fight through some very underwhelming aerial encounters against the Covenant. There was opportunity for 343 to innovate and build upon Bungie's foundations. Unfortunately, however, what we ended up with didn't stick the landing. Even so, that initial disappointment could have been tempered somewhat if the 3 on-foot sections breaking up the level were of a higher quality, but they are not. If you like fighting Prometheans, and I'd hazard a guess and say a lot of you probably don't, you might enjoy them. If you're like me and find the combination of them, the gondola rides, and the visually cluttered, overly busy Forerunner environments to be a real chore, then you probably won't. There is a great monologue from Cortana at the level's beginning, and the continued development of the relationship between her and Master Chief is handled well throughout, but I think that can be said of a lot of Halo 4's missions, which means it's ultimately not enough to save Shutdown from finishing in 8th place. 7th on my list is Midnight. Midnight actually has perhaps the strongest start out of any of Halo 4's missions, as you race to stop the Didact using the Composer, and its final moments between Chief and Cortana are very touching. The opening is another linear vehicle sequence in a game packed full of far too many linear vehicle sequences, but it is by far the best of the bunch. You've probably come across similar sections in other video games, and it hardly reinvents the wheel in gameplay terms, yet it's hard not to get excited by the spectacle of it all, and that's exactly what you want during the final level of any game. The problem is that Midnight doesn't go on to do anything particularly special after its exhilarating opening. As much as I'd like to rank it higher on this list due to how it begins, I think it would be unfair to give it a pass because of that, given that the rest of its runtime focuses squarely on battles with hordes of Prometheans in areas that are none too different from every other Forerunner environment you'll have encountered during Halo 4. You may at times be tricked into thinking that they're an improvement on those you've already tackled, with the skybox towards the level's end being a very impressive one that adds a real sense of grandeur, but really, it's all window dressing which adds little to the moment-to-moment experience. It also has a couple of moments that I believe are some of the worst in the entire game. The first is the section where you hold off waves of enemies while Cortana locates the Composer. It kills the mission's pacing stone dead at a time when it really should have been ramping things up, and it adds unnecessary padding where none was really required. The second is the climactic moment during which Chief defeats the Didact. I don't know about you, but after getting through what is quite a brutal series of skirmishes, I was expecting to have to do a little bit more than simply press a button or two in order to finally vanquish my foe. Forerunner is the mission which pits you against the Prometheans for the very first time and does a decent job of creating a very alien atmosphere, which is why it finds itself ranked number 6. During this level, the Prometheans have yet to outstay their welcome, as they were only introduced during the conclusion of the mission prior, and combined with them still being hostile towards the Covenant at this stage, you get to take part in some entertaining multi-faction battles. These encounters work well alongside the foreboding atmosphere 343 fosters through the dark, rocky environment you find yourself in, and the use of some quite haunting music to create a fairly unique ambience. My big issue with Forerunner is that it goes on for way too long. The mission marks the beginning of 343 throwing in too many samey objectives you have to complete, on this occasion by destroying 2 trios of power cores, and it's too much. Having to take down 1 at each location or 3 at one location would have been more than enough, especially considering the level design around each of the pylons that cause power is very slapdash. They're little more than massive areas which the enemy AI isn't really capable of using to their fullest, and everything very quickly begins to drag on. The introduction of the Didact at Forerunner's conclusion is well done, and I really like that 343 threw in the ghost escape sequence after it, rather than ending with the cutscene itself. However, they're not good enough that I'd ever want to play through the mission again to reach them. In at number 5 is Dawn, a level that I think is a very respectable start to 343's time with the franchise. While many might be of the opinion that Halo's, at the time, new custodians often don't take enough cues from previous games in the franchise, Dawn makes a good case for that not always being so. Halo Combat Evolved's first mission is set aboard the Pillar of Autumn, Halo 2's takes place on Cairo Station, and again at the start of Halo 4 you find yourself aboard a human vessel which is under attack by the Covenant. After a slow burn first 5 minutes or so, you soon find yourself battling your way through the ship to reach a missile used to destroy a Covenant cruiser, and the escape sequence which follows is a solid bit of cinema, even if it's not mechanically the most testing section you'll ever encounter. When I first played Halo 4, I was quietly encouraged by how confidently 343 Industries used this mission to tee everything up for your time on Requiem, and even if the rest of the game perhaps didn't pan out quite as expected, it's a good first attempt at a Halo opening mission. If I could improve anything about Dawn, I'd have actually liked it to be a little bit longer than it is. That being said, there's nothing that bad actually featured within the mission, and some of it is downright excellent. This moment when the Covenant fleet reveals itself a particular favourite of mine. I had a really hard time trying to figure out where to put Composer on this list, and in the end it's just missed out on a spot on the podium, finishing in 4th place. This is a mission which starts out really strong, as you enter an Ivanov research station already under attack by the Didact and the Covenant. 343 takes a few moments to slow things down ever so slightly to build some atmosphere before the shooting begins, although honestly, this section could have gone on a little longer than it does, as there's not enough like it in Halo 4's campaign. A massive plus for me is that you get to fight only the Covenant for the entirety of the level's runtime, a rarity by this point in the game, and combined with some familiar sequences such as mounting turrets while the Covenant ferries in troops, and some great level design in the more open areas, it almost begins to feel like something Bungie would have come up with back in the day. Granted, it would have been one of Bungie's more linear efforts. Composer is a very linear affair, but it's also one that keeps a good pace throughout, varying encounters and throwing in exposition at regular intervals to help keep things interesting. And who doesn't love firing Covenant out of airlocks, of course? Composer is also the mission where the grim reality of Cortana's situation settles in, as she barely manages to contain her rampancy. The scene with the crashing Lich is superb, and the AI's constant fits as the level progresses adds a hefty second layer of narrative weight, which the level wasn't exactly lacking to begin with, given the stakes in terms of the Didact's part of the story. Indeed, I think it's rather telling that both Composer and Midnight Which Follows both end with wonderful scenes focused on Chief and Cortana's relationship, rather than Halo 4's overarching story. I wonder whether 343 perhaps realised at some point during development that it was the stronger part of the game's plot. Collecting the bronze medal in my Halo 4 mission rankings is Requiem. I mentioned previously that Dawn feels very much like a first level in the mould of those created by Bungie, and Requiem also feels like one out of their playbook, a mission in the mould of Halo, the second level in Combat Evolved. The crash site you wake up to is frankly gorgeous, and I like the way 343 gradually increases the intensity of events over time. In fact, it's a good few minutes before you see any enemies at all, and you even have to hop in a Warthog for a time before you find any Covenant. It's really patient world building, which feels sort of at odds with a lot of the rest of Halo 4's campaign, which tends to be action-packed with little time given to catch your breath. Once you do eventually meet your long-suffering adversary, you're treated to a couple of larger, open areas, along with some more narrow encounters, and at times, Requiem has a real rhythm to it, as you engage in these bigger and smaller firefights while hopping on various vehicles to travel between them. I believe this also to be the mission which uses Forerunner architecture better than any other in the game, and I'd have loved for all the other levels in Halo 4 to have utilised it in a similar manner. While there are one or two sections where it dominates the screen, a lot of the time it's space mixed in with more lush surroundings, and it works brilliantly. It creates a lovely contrast between the natural and the unnatural, and it makes the world feel alien while still being visually appealing, unlike the more Forerunner-focused environments later in the campaign, which are way too much. All in all, it's a very solid second mission, which is why it's placed so highly on my list. Infinity is for me the best example of 343's style of linear Halo mission, which can at times be almost Call of Duty-like in their execution, working to great effect, which is why I've awarded it second place. The jungle section at its beginning I think could serve to be cut down a tad, but it's also the best area of its kind aesthetically we've had in a Halo title, with each area's snaking pathways cleverly built into the wholly natural environment. The fog-filled section you have to traverse using Promethean vision is for my money the best example of 343 making equipment an integral part of gameplay, something which should have been done more, and the battles against the combined forces of both Prometheans and Covenant does create a new dynamic in terms of combat. Where Infinity really begins to come alive for me, however, is when you arrive at the Scorpion run. Again, like much of 4, you've little other choice in how you approach the situation, but nonetheless, it's an exhilarating affair in a stunning environment which really gets the blood pumping. My biggest criticism of Infinity would perhaps be the Mantis section. You first have to make your way through a lengthy section of the Infinity, which I think could have been cut entirely to make way for the final holdout against the Didact's forces, which follows immediately after. Infinity is not a subtle mission, and it goes on a little too long, but with its fast-paced, explosive gameplay and concluding scene between Chief, Cortana, Del Rio and Lasky, it feels like the point in Halo 4's campaign when the game finally begins to really kick into gear. Like Shutdown earlier, if you've been watching my recent videos, it won't be a huge shock to find out that taking a very well-deserved first place on my list is Reclaimer. What I love about Reclaimer is that unlike most of the rest of 4, 343 takes an entirely new concept for how a Halo level could be structured and runs with it. It's a level so good that I wish they had decided to be quite a bit more daring with the rest of the game's campaign, as they clearly had it in them to create unique scenarios which added something new to the franchise. So often in Halo 4, 343's more linear design philosophy gives the impression of there being less choices on offer for players, but during Reclaimer, the Mammoth being part of encounters opens up a whole new avenue of decisions to make. You also get to take part in quite a few big, open encounters. Those you come across while riding in the Mammoth scale up perfectly the further you progress, and the sequence which follows, during which you'll likely still be equipped with the jetpack, is a great example of 343 being able to craft on-foot sections packed full of verticality and opportunities to use movement to your advantage. There is a slight lull in proceedings around Reclaimer's midpoint as you explore a Forerunner facility before being greeted by a very heavy-handed lore dump, but thankfully it picks up not long after and ends on a real high note. As you come out of a portal, you're met with this scene, and isn't it blooming beautiful? Looking out across the battlefield and the chaos ensuing was, for me, the point in the game where Halo 4 felt most like a Halo title, the moment where just for a second I was able to sit back and pretend I was playing a game packed full of wide, open encounters and limitless possibilities. It would be hard to make the argument that Reclaimer is one of the best Halo missions full stop, although I think it would still be towards the top of my list. But as far as Halo 4 goes, Reclaimer is, I believe, the best level in the game's campaign. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video, boys, girls and Spartans. If you had a good time, do consider liking, subscribing and letting me know how your list would look, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.